Wonderful. We're going to take a little bit of time for some introductions. So good afternoon, everyone, and happy MLK Day. So excited to have you all join us today. My name is Nikki Sosa, use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Community Partnerships Coordinator with the Collaborative for Community Engagement.
And hi, everyone. My name is Sophia Prey. I'm the Civic Leadership Paraprofessional at the CCE.
Today, Sophia and I are very excited to welcome an extraordinary panel of local change makers, folks who are heavily invested in our local community here in Colorado Springs and represent a wide array of pathways as engaged community members. This panel is a part of our Moving Beyond the Vote Half Block course, which we are in the midst of currently. It's a course that's designed to encourage continued conversations about what each of us can do to act on our values, sustain our political engagement, and show up for ourselves and each other. Today, we hope to highlight and recognize the work of these outstanding individuals and learn about their stories, their motivations, their efforts, and in doing so, we hope to uplift the work of community engagement, find inspiration, and engage in deep reflection about the state of our community. Our facilitated discussion will take around an hour, and there'll be about 30 minutes at the end for open Q&A. We'd like to encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A function on Zoom today, and Sophia will be moderating that later on today. We'll also be recording this session, and without further ado, we'd like to head into some introductions of our panelists. So folks who are joining us today on the panel, again, welcome, excited to hear more about you. For your introductions, we would love for you each to tell us your name, your role, the organization, or type of work that you engage in. And then if you could briefly share the story of you as it relates to your current or past engagement work. How did you discern your path into this realm of work? Are you focusing on storytelling, self-reflection at this time? If you could take 1 to 2 minutes to share it with a little bit more about who you are and your path. And if we can start with Yolanda.
Hi, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here for MLK Day. My name is Yolanda Avila, and I am presently serving on City Council. And as a City Council member, I also I'm a board of directors for our CSU utility company, which has all 4 services. I'm also on many boards and commissions as my role as a city councilor. But one of the things that one of the boards I'm on is the El Paso County Board of Health, which has been playing a huge role with this pandemic. So really, I grew up here. My dad was stationed here in 1958. I can't claim that I'm a native, but I've been here since I was 3. And this was home base. And actually, by the time I was 7, I had lived in 3 different countries. So we were able to go everywhere in the United States. But always came home to Colorado Springs, and this is my city, my home. I represent Southeast Colorado Springs, which is District 4, and talk about the diversity in District 4 and also the disparities as well. So we are the most diverse district in the entire state of Colorado. And we suffer a lot of social determinants of health, such as maybe our population living 16 years less than the rest of the city. Our area is 6 to 8 degrees hotter than the rest of the city. We have food deserts, medical deserts. And so why did I get into this line of work? It was to, I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, and I came to rely on public transportation. And I realized that the transportation for people with disabilities and who really needed it wasn't there. So initially I got into this line of work to make it accessible. And, you know, when it started, when I was in California for 21 years, and I came back to be by my mom, who was going to be 90 years old at the time. And I couldn't believe what was going on in the city. So I wanted to take action. You know, initially the buses were running Monday through Friday. And so by the time about 3 years later, it took about that much time, but we did get evening routes and weekend routes, 7 days a week. So I saw that I could make a change then. So I went on further to run for council.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. Welcome. Max, can we head over to you next for introductions?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Nikki and Sophia, for putting this on. My name is Max Kronstadt. I'm a recent graduate of Colorado College, and I am an organizer and co-founder of the Colorado Springs Housing Partnership. And we are a new group working to organize our local community in support of city policies that will make housing more affordable. And I got into this work really out of a desire, first and foremost, just to be engaged in the city. It was going to be my home for at least 4 years when I came to CC, and I wanted to have a stake in it. And sort of ended up settling on housing as an issue to focus on, just because it was so pressing, and because I had an academic interest in it. And so a friend and I spent about 6 months sort of just reading what we could, talking to who we could, and trying to figure out how we could get involved in the city around affordable housing. And sort of what was expressed to us by various community leaders that what was needed in the city was a grassroots effort to bring people into the conversation about affordable housing. For so long, it's been dominated by certain voices, and that's led to outcomes that are not desirable in terms of housing affordability. And so, yeah, just gone from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Max. And Anthony, can we jump over to you?
Hello, everybody. My name is Anthony Carlson. I've been engaging with CC students since I've did my first campaign in Colorado Springs in 2016. So it's always a pleasure to be invited to be part of these conversations and to continue to engage with CC students as they figure out their ways to, helping make Colorado Springs a little bit of a better place. But my name is Anthony Carlson. I've been engaging in political campaign and community organizing work for the last 10 years. I am the owner of a consulting firm called A Squared Strategies, and I'm also the executive director of a local nonprofit called Peak Partnership, which really just tries to figure out how to get what I call the tough work done in Colorado Springs that other folks don't think is possible. So we take on the hard campaigns. For the past few years, it's been school funding issues, helping D11 get funding, helping Harrison District 2 get funding. And last year before COVID changed our lives, we were exploring the opportunity for a council pay initiative that would have went on the November ballot of last year. But unfortunately, COVID sidelined that. It's a little bit of a tough ask of voters to ask them to raise their wage for elected officials when so many folks are hurting themselves economically. So we're tabling that and hoping to bring it back to voters, within the next couple of years or so. But really got me in this work is I grew up in a very conservative part of North Texas in a conservative family of a military dad and evangelical mom. And obviously I'm somebody my values are more along the lines of a liberal to progressive end of the political spectrum. And I've always been fascinated with bridging that divide and trying to figure out how do we talk about our values in a way that's more broadly appealing to folks who on the surface don't think they agree with it. Some examples of that is minimum wage. When you talk to folks about raising the minimum wage, it becomes a partisan argument, Republicans versus Democrats or liberals versus conservatives. But when you boil it down and when you put it on the ballot, when you do polling on issues like minimum wage, it's widely supported. 60 to 70% of the folks in pretty much just about every state that's had minimum wage on the ballot has passed it. And so one of the fascinating things that's really brought me into politics and that I really focus a lot of my work on and my role in the communities that I work in is how do we communicate our values in such a way that's more approachable, that brings more people to the table. And at the end of the day, helps us, helps our values win, not just at the ballot box, but in people's hearts and minds. And so, folks who call me a community organizer, folks who call me a campaign manager, but really in my heart, what I love trying to figure out is how do we bridge that divide and that gap that just exists within our vocabulary so that we get more people on board with the values that we share. We're just not talking about it in the same language.
Perfect. Thank you, Anthony. Welcome. Martrice?
Hi, my name is Martrice Ellis. I am a senior at Colorado College, and I have many roles on campus, but I'll highlight two during today. So one of the roles that I have is that I'm one of the co-op co-directors, and that program is within the CCE, and I help specifically with the Bonner Fellowship Program. And then I've also founded a group called Safe CC starting this past summer / fall semester, and that is within another group called the Collective for Anti-Racism and Liberation. And so that's a fairly new group. And so I've been involved within like community activism and things such as that for the past 6-ish years. And I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. So if anyone's aware of like the Mike Brown situation and everything like that. So yeah, I've been around that climate for a while. And I got involved with the Aspen Institute. And so they kind of took me through this kind of journey of social entrepreneurship and how to talk to people and how to evaluate communities and really get involved. And I found out that I really love like being a connector. So I like finding out what this person wants, and then finding a way how to match those together and make it work. And so like that translates to really all of the roles that I have, whether it's like the music industry, I help out with some of that, or like my activism. So yeah, I really just enjoy doing that. And so this past couple months, I've been involved with Safe CC. And so we have been putting out proposals and things like that, evaluating the relationship between Colorado College and the local PD here. And so we've actually gotten them to commit to doing some of the things that we put in our proposal. So that's what we're moving forward with this next semester. So yeah, I really just kind of go with my intuition and what I like, and found a way of how to match that with what other people want in the community.
Thank you, Martrice. Happy to have you with us today. And Carlos, if you can introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Carlos Jimenez. Thanks for having me, and excited to be talking about this topic on MLK Day as well. I am a 2004 Colorado College graduate, and I jumped into college admission right after graduation, and actually worked my way up to the director of admission role at Colorado College. So I worked at CC for 6 years. I worked at Colorado State University for 4 years, and then came back to work at CC from 14 through 19. And currently I'm serving in the role of CEO of Peak Education. And our work is to help empower students, primarily from the Southeast Colorado Springs area, but also we have some students in Manitou, and we're expanding into District 11 as well. And we work with low-income students who are striving to get into college. And so we start in 7th grade and work with them all the way through college entrance, and then even help them once they're in college to make it through college and maximize their college experience. And so one of the things that I saw as an admission director for many years and working in college admission was you're on the receiving end of the educational process of K through 12 essentially, and seeing things like what kinds of classes were students taking, what are their skill sets like, how's this going to translate into college or college success. And so I kept thinking that there's a ton more that can be done to level the playing field and create more equity around educational access and opportunity. And I got to travel the country. That's one of the benefits of being in college admission work, is you travel all over the place and you see different educational systems and structures, and also you see that inequity very much firsthand in the many different cities that I traveled to. And so one of the things that I think was interesting to me as I was reflecting on this question was when I was thinking about joining Peak Education and doing work locally, I had realized that I've done all this college access work in a number of different communities. And so I presented to students in Chicago and worked with students in LA and in Connecticut and New York City. And I realized, I've hardly done anything for college access in Colorado Springs, even though I've lived there for most of my adult life. And so that's what kind of got me started on the path of heading towards Peak Education. Was I helped consult with the organization for over a year, and then kind of helped them come up with some strategic priorities. And they said, well, it'd be great if you'd actually run the organization and do this work. And I said yes. I think I was just really excited to be able to I loved higher ed and I loved working at CC, but I thought being able to work with the students directly and make an impact in the schools in our community, that was just really exciting to me, and the work was really compelling. So I look forward to the rest of the conversation, but thanks for having me, and excited for this topic.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carlos. So our first question leading into our facilitated discussion kind of is an extension of the introduction. Would love to hear from each of you in sharing more about the local issue or issues that you focus on addressing here in Colorado Springs. And also if you could share what strategies you use to address that issue. For those of us who might be on the call who are not familiar with Colorado Springs, maybe we have some students who are brand new to the community, if you could also share a little bit of context about what that issue looks like here locally as well. So I'll open this up. Would love to hear from each of you. Feel free to jump in and share a little bit more about the local issue or issues that you're working on.
I can start. So the main issue that I kind of focus on is really community safety, and that really encompasses like everything. So not just looking at like what police and those systems do, but like mental health and like equity and opportunities and such. So that I encompass all of that within community safety. And so hopefully everyone is aware of, you know, the climate that the U.S. has been in for the past couple of years. I guess it's been here always, but it's been more apparent this past year or so. And so, yeah, that really kind of like sparked me looking into Colorado Springs specifically and seeing how this functions in Colorado Springs, whether that's with the oversight committee that's already within the city that they just started a couple months ago. So yeah, we really just kind of started looking at stats and statistics and stuff like that we had, and trying to figure out like what do we have and what don't we have, so that we can actually look at this problem as a whole and holistically. And so really the main thing that we kind of started off with is that we went to the community and started talking to the community, because we already came in with a lot of assumptions about what the situation looked like. But it's really hard to act on that because you can do something that's actually detrimental to the community if you don't know what they want, how it functions, and things like that. So yeah, that's really the main strategy. We always send out surveys, or like me personally, I'm always at like community events, networking, talking to people, not like formally, but like informally to, you know, figure out who Colorado Springs is and what this community means.
I'll hop in. So for the first 2 years that I was in Colorado Springs, I've been here since 2016. A lot of my focus after city council elections in 2017 was education focused. I believe a growing community, a community that is maturing into a big city. The foundation of a great city is having an equitable and fair and just education system. And so making sure that students in our largest central school district and in our southeastern school district had the same opportunity to resources and great teachers as kids in any other part of the city. In the last couple of years, and especially during the time of COVID, I've really started kind of reflecting on, you know, what I think are the greater gaps in our government and how we can start filling in those holes. And it really started a little bit before COVID with trying to put an initiative for raising our city council pay on the ballot last year. Right now, if you're a city councilor in Colorado Springs, your yearly salary or stipend, as they call it, is only $6,250 a year. Which really precludes a lot of folks from being able to run for office and from being able to serve. We're grateful and thankful to have folks like Yolanda, but you know, the ways that we find more folks who have a truly represent, you know, the common person in this city is by making sure that there's access. And you know, when salary is a burden to that or a barrier to that, you know, that's a challenge that we have to fix. Over the past year, you know, I've started reflecting on, you know, what I think some of the other challenges are that we have in government. And one of the things that I've really recognized is I think there's a true hunger and a true wish from folks in communities in Colorado Springs and across the country to actually have more of a voice and more relationships with the folks who actually represent them and their elected leaders. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about over the past year is how do we start using all these technologies and these new ways of communicating and talking to each other that we've really started to embrace over the last year and use that to bring more people into our local government, into our local politics. You know, for the longest time, probably since the founding of our country, the number one way that politicians use to talk to their constituents is through town halls, right? But to me, I kind of view town halls as the field of dreams, you know, build it and hope they come. But in today's world, you know, what town halls do is you only have the ability to access those if you're a very specific person. You know, if you're a single mom working 2 jobs, you probably can't go to a town hall. You know, if you're a high school kid who depends on transportation, guess what? You probably can't go to a town hall. But we have so many different ways today, whether it's Zoom, whether it's text messaging, all these technologies to be able to really start bringing people closer to the decisions that affect them. And I'm a big believer that one of the biggest challenges we have with government as a whole today is a lack of trust. The folks who are sending our elected officials to serve, they fundamentally don't trust those folks. And to me, the best way to undo that and to start rebuilding trust is through good communication. And so one of the things that I've really, I think, made almost a passion project of mine coming into this year is I've worked with and I've ranked candidates for office for the last 10 years. But I'm to the point now where I can choose who I work with and who I don't work with, just through my opportunities that have been given to me. And I've chosen to work specifically with candidates who want to try new ways of engaging their communities, new ways of engaging voters, and bringing more folks into our local political process, and believing that if we can do that, that folks get a better understanding of exactly how their government works, but two, are more thoughtful with the decisions that are made, and hopefully are even more respectful and thoughtful of their neighbors and other folks and how it impacts people, not just in their neighborhood, but across our community, as they get to know folks who might not come from the same background or the same neighborhoods as their own.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Yolanda. I'll go next. So I'd like to thank Anthony. He actually worked on my campaign in 2017. It's been 4 years now. So a little bit about City Council. So we have 9 council members, 3 at-large members, which means they represent the entire city, and we have 6 district seats. Our city is probably with the census, we're coming up on 500,000. So I represent District 4. And there's been talk about access, limited access. And one of the things is what Anthony said about trust is huge in my district, because there have been many promises made and not delivered on. And sometimes my district has been looked at as a charity versus something to invest in. And there have been so many barriers in terms of transportation, in terms of employment. At one point, we were as a city, at 3.5% unemployment, while in my district, it was 8.5%. And one of the things that happened is a few years prior to that, the Northwest Service Center, Citizen Service Center, which houses the Workforce Center, DHS, and all the benefits that you can apply for, Social Security and all that, was moved from our area to the northwest side of town, which was a 2-hour bus ride for many of our constituents. So that but is part of the reasons we were having such high unemployment rates. And also with the lack of a robust transit system, if there were jobs outside of the district, let's say, then it was almost impossible to get to those jobs because buses don't run there. So I talk about the city. So we have a strong mayor system, which means that the mayor basically runs all the departments: police, fire, parks and rec, public works, and just makes a decision for that. Mostly council members, what we do is we do legislation, come up with policies, as well as land use. We do the land use and the zoning. We have a lot of quasi-type judicial meetings where it's almost like being in court and like having 9 judges. And we make decisions on what's going to happen with the use of the land, and also in terms of zoning. And lately we've been doing a lot of annexing. So right now our city is 200 square miles. And we are continuing to annex, and it's continuing to grow. And so I did want to touch upon what Anthony said. It does make a difference. Everybody on council is over 55, let's say, and many 70 and 50 to 60, and it's not representative of the entire, the city. 5 council members are retired military. And yeah, we have 5 military bases here, but there is not a young person on council, someone that has children, someone that, that lives the same way. But I want to put in a plug for local politics, because all the attention is put on the national and maybe some for the state, but not local. And local is, I'm going to say, is the most important, because we all are on the same streets, roads, sidewalks, bridges. We're all impacted by traffic. We're all impacted by speeding. We're all impacted by what parks we have. And we meet each other at the grocery stores, at the medical clinics. And we, at this level, you actually do have a say in contacting your representative city council as well as the at-large members, and can really have a voice in what's going on.
I think that's great. Yolanda, I didn't realize there wasn't somebody who was under 55 on the city council. That's crazy. So I wanted to just talk a little bit for a minute as we've been talking, Anthony and Yolanda's comments, have kind of made me think a little bit about sort of the approach that we're doing at Peak Ed is sort of thinking about the theory of change, not to get too academic, but the, where are you having your impact at? And I hear Anthony and Yolanda talking about having impact at the city level, making a bigger policy change, pulling a lever that maybe impacts the system, directly. And I think that's part of what we're trying to work on with Peak Education, trying to help schools become better at providing college counseling and scholarship counseling services to their students, building college going cultures, thinking about, we're not tutoring in math and we're not tutoring in English. That's just not our lane. We're really trying to help our students think about how do you set goals, how do you study better, how do you overcome a difficult obstacle or challenge, a low grade, a racist incident, whatever it is that they're focused, whatever it is they encounter, how can you deal with that? And so we're working both at the system level, trying to think about how can we impact the school or the school districts that we work with, but recognizing that at the same time, there are individual students going through that system right now who need guidance and support and help as well. And so we serve about 300 students in our program, and through working with those students, we learn a lot about some of the structural challenges and barriers that those students face as they're trying to pursue college. And then we try to, the idea is that we would go back to the districts and say, well, here's what we're finding. How can we work together to overcome some of these things? And so just so folks know, nationally, about 67% of students go into a post-secondary option of some kind upon high school graduation. And in the state of Colorado, it's 57%. So some of you might have heard of the Colorado paradox, where we're one of the highest educated populations in our state, but we're not necessarily reproducing at the national rate for college enrollment. In the city, it's about 52%. And if you take out the two most affluent school districts, District 12 and District 20, it's about 42% of high school grads who go on to a post-secondary option. And I really believe that there are multiple pathways to the middle class. We talked a lot about helping students get certifications and apprenticeships and entering the workforce in some kind of direct pathway. But in mass, the numbers still say that getting a bachelor's degree and leveraging the bachelor's degree is the surefire way to get a ticket to the middle class. And so, there are other pathways there, but the most likely route is to be able to leverage that bachelor's degree, the 4-year degree, and use that to get into a professional position of some kind. And we still see by the numbers that is where people enter the middle class at a minimum. You need some kind of post-secondary credential. 72% of all careers are still requiring some kind of post-secondary credential. It may not be a 4-year degree, but it might be a certificate or something that allows you to access some of those higher paying middle income positions that will allow you to have some financial security once you leave college. So there's much more to what we're doing at Peak Ed, but just from a high level, that's sort of some of the stuff that how we approach our work and what we're thinking about.
So our focus as an organization is on affordable housing, but that's obviously a really broad topic with a lot of different facets. And so more specifically, for the last year and a half, we've been focused on zoning. And there are a lot of reasons we've been focused on zoning, but I'll sort of highlight 4. So zoning are the laws that essentially dictate what can be built where and what it can be used for. And right now in Colorado Springs, 83% of our residential land, so land dedicated for homes and apartments, is zoned for single family use. And what that means is that you can only have a single family home on a lot of land that has to be pretty large. There are minimum lot sizes that make sure they're large. And so that makes the most affordable types of housing illegal on over 4/5 of the city's land. And it constricts the overall housing supply. So as our city grows, we're not able to meet the housing demand, and that's what's causing, us to see Gazette article after Gazette article saying that the Colorado Springs housing market is overheating, and people aren't able to afford to buy homes or to rent. And so that's the first reason. It has a huge impact on housing affordability. The second reason is, in addition to being so important in terms of housing affordability, zoning has a major impact on the types of social inequities that we see so pronounced in our city on the basis of race and on the basis of zip code. Single family zoning was created or became widespread in American cities after a Supreme Court decision in 1917 that made racially exclusionary zoning illegal. And it was promoted by the Harding administration as a constitutional workaround. Essentially, if white neighborhoods couldn't explicitly ban people of color from moving in, they could try and make it prohibitively expensive. And so that's its origin. It's part of a family of policies that include things like redlining, things like block busting, and yet it's still the dominant form of residential zoning in our city and in our country. And so if we are going to build a city that is more equitable, that is more inclusive, this is something, a relic of a past era that really needs to go. The third, as Councilwoman Avila mentioned, is that land use is one of the elements of affordable housing that city governments have a lot of control over. In terms of funding streams and tax credits, there's a lot of stuff that comes from state and federal governments, but city governments have pretty exclusive control over their land use decisions. And the fourth is that the city is currently undergoing a comprehensive revision of the zoning code. And this is the kind of thing that is only done every 20, 25 years at minimum. It's called Retool COS, the process. And so it's a huge opportunity to make some real positive change. But it's only going to happen if people get involved and voice their support for allowing more affordable types of housing in the existing residential zones, particularly existing single family zones. And so, what we've been trying to do is just get people to comment when they open up comment periods. Particularly because those kind of comment periods and those town halls have been so dominated for so long by wealthy homeowners who don't want anything to change in their neighborhood. Our goal has sort of been, we need to bring that other side that exists in this city, that has existed for a long time, but just hasn't been part of these conversations, and demonstrate to our city council that these voices exist and that they want to see change.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. And I do want to highlight something I heard in some way from each of our panelists talk about one of their strategies in doing the work is creating some allyship and finding other individuals who are also engaging in this work and working between sectors as well, and finding people to kind of build a coalition, a collective in some way to make change here locally in Colorado Springs. So yeah, that's something I just want to highlight, that I heard from all of you in some way, that this work can't necessarily be done alone and really shouldn't be done alone. It should be done alongside and with community. Thank you all so much for sharing that. Also, I just want to highlight real quick, we have a comment in the chat. Carlos, have you thought about running for office? Let's get some youth in there. So just something to kind of sit on, Carlos, if you're interested ever in running for local office. Want to continue the conversation and hear now about some challenges. If you could all share what challenges, if any, have you had with your form of engagement? Has there been any pushback in Colorado Springs with the form of engagement that you encourage or that you facilitate, whether it's through misconceptions, pure resistance? What does that look like for you? And how do you respond to that resistance if you have met that? Max, why don't we go ahead and kind of follow up with your comments?
Sure. Well, so I think the biggest challenge with our form of engagement is what we've really relied on is trying to get people to submit comments whenever the city publishes some sort of draft and solicits public comment, to get people to submit a comment and, pre-COVID show up to some sort of event and speak. And the issue is that zoning, as important as it is, it's really quite boring a lot of the time, and kind of technical, and feels very like arcane, and not that grounded in the everyday needs of people. And so trying to get people to look up from their busy lives and care about this zoning change that the city is making that doesn't really seem like it should matter to them is difficult. But because we've been using those established channels for public engagement that the city provides, I think we've gotten a lot of pushback in terms of our form of engagement from too many people in the city. Whether or not that's a good thing, who's really to say? But that's sort of what we've been trying to do.
Go ahead. I think, and this ties back to Martin Luther King Jr. Day and what's going on. So we need to talk about the riots that happened this summer surrounding George Floyd. So initially in my district, Devon Bailey was shot in the back and killed by, several gunshots. And prior to that, Joshua Vigil in my district also, who had experiencing mental issues, and their family was really concerned about him. And he ended up being shot almost 17 times. So when I first started to deal with this situation and talking to council, it was like I was walking a tightrope, because I didn't want to disparage the police, but I also wanted to support the concerns of my community. And but it was like talking to a brick wall, because when you think about it, like the president is in charge, commander in chief of the military, and the mayor is in charge of the police. And at this point, they don't see that they're doing anything wrong. They don't see that the policies that are in place now have any bearing on what's happened. And so it's been a difficult way to engage with the police and other council members when none of the council members come from an experience that people in my district come from, where we are so much more impacted. So in my district, a lot of my constituents felt like I wasn't strong enough and that I wasn't advocating. And I was doing it behind the scenes, making sure that when we did have our town halls, we have like over 50 people show up for this particular session. And the council wanted to just say, hey, we're only going to have 3 spokespersons for this. And I'm like, no, this is the people's place. And each and every person that wants to talk will have a voice. They will talk. But, the constituents didn't see that. And I was trying to say, well, the police are doing the best they can. They just need better training. We need to change some policies. But then fast forward to George Floyd, when that happened, and we were having protests at City Hall almost daily, and finally instituted the Law Enforcement Transparency Accountability Commission, which I am the liaison for. But at that, the city is still insisting that it's not an oversight committee. And the commission is very limited to what they can access. So there's issues there. But since I've spoken up, my colleagues are very upset with me. And when I called out racism, people don't want to hear that, right? It's very uncomfortable. I'm told many times that when I speak, you can hear a pin drop, and you can actually feel the other council members squirming in their seats. And so, but I am the voice for that. But since I've been speaking up very vocally about, the injustice and how we need to change this, my constituents are like, oh, wow. So they're coming forward, and I'm getting so many emails and calls, and they're very pleased that I understand the situation. And so, but that is huge. And especially when you think about what happened at the Capitol, when we had domestic terrorists do an attack on our temple of democracy, and be able to go in there and get so far as to have 5 deaths in there, and putting our Congress people in jeopardy. And that happened, there was a little part of that here in Colorado Springs when the protesters went to the police, POC, I forget what's it, operations center, the police operations center. When the Yellow Jackets went, the white supremacists with their AKAs, and they were not, they were not bullied, they were not threatened, they were gently taken in, to talk to, and they weren't arrested. So it's just the difference of how our citizens are treated and what is happening. So that's been a real, when we talk about, I'm a city council member, right? We do land use, we do, the budget, and it's the mayor that runs it, but it's important for me to know that my constituents have a voice through me and work the best that I can with that.
Thank you so much, Yolanda, for sharing that perspective. My apologies, Martrice. I just wanted to share out a little bit of love to Yolanda from one of our attendees. Accountability is love. Holding the police accountable to the public is part of the job. Thanks for championing transparency and accountability, Yolanda, and just wanted to echo that as well. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Go ahead.
To talk a little bit about that. I think for me, that has been one of the largest challenges. It's like not trying to make people appear a certain way, but we definitely haven't gotten pushback from the Colorado Springs Police Department. We've gotten weird emails, we've gotten weird comments and things like that, or just I have personal experience of interactions with the Colorado Springs Police Department, and I've seen that difference in treatment firsthand. So it's really hard, when you bring up an issue and it's tied to people's morals or their personal values, it's really hard for people to take a step back and to actually think about the topic that you're talking about holistically without becoming offended or defensive. So I definitely have received pushback for talking about it, or it's not an issue, or racism doesn't exist, or well, maybe you're over exaggerating, or let's try to think of it in a different way. So I really do think that that's something that has to be looked at, if we're noticing that there's difference in treatments between how one group is viewed versus another. This goes to news reports, what pictures are used, the language that's used, all of that goes into that. And while people may not try to do that purposely, it's inherently in our culture and our system and the way that we navigate. And so that has to be talked about in order for us to have a real conversation. And so it is definitely hard. If I was to go up to an officer, what do you think about your police system? That's going to seem like an attack, and so it definitely is hard to have those conversations without anger and things involved. So I'm not necessarily sure how to have those conversations, but I would encourage anyone in that work to, try to take a step back and try to understand all sides and things like that. And also another thing that I wanted to touch on that someone mentioned is, about representation and how important that is. It's if you're trying to fix an issue that you don't have personal experience with, it's trying to learn a new language. No matter how much you learn this new language, you'll never be able to comprehend it fully to the extent of the people that were just born in that language. So you can try and try, but the reality of the situation is that you need people that actually speak that language, that have experienced this in there. It can't just be a conversation between city council and other politicians that have no idea what they're talking about, or just going off assumptions. You need people that are coming from those communities, and a large part of that goes to access, the bus system. If I go to Walmart, it's going to take me 2 hours, just to get to Walmart, and that's a huge issue. And so if they're focusing time on other things, just to survive, of course it's going to be hard for them to have time to have activism and things like that, because they're literally trying to get money to eat, and are worrying about a target on their back when they walk out of the door. And so I would encourage anyone that's doing this type of work to really think about representation. And if it's not an issue that you personally have had experience with, you're more a representative, or you're more helping those people that are having harder access get into the door, get into the foot. And it's not meant for you to be that person at the table, speaking for them or over them. So.
Am I the last one, or?
You
Am I-
and Carlos, I think, yeah, if we can hear from you and Carlos about like some challenges that you might face and resistance in the community that you might have come up against.
Yeah, I think, for me and the work that I've done, especially since my career has pivoted so much to really kind of taking on local politics versus, federal politics, which is what the first half of my career was just, it's really easy to get excited about federal politics, right? When you just had a presidential campaign where there was $2.5 billion just in fundraising spent on it, plus what all the PACs raised and all of that. It's just marketing, right? And so everybody gravitates towards the big flashy thing that we get to, it's like almost the Super Bowl of politics in this country every 4 years, right? But where we actually have the greatest power to facilitate and enact and be part of change is at the local level. It's so much easier to be able to access somebody, Yolanda or whatever other city council members or even the mayor than it is our congressmen, right? Or even our US senators. And we also have the ability to facilitate and create so much more change locally than we do with our federal government. And the impact of that change is felt immediately, and you can see it throughout your community. And one of the challenges that I've had overcoming is really kind of convincing people and helping, people in our community realize and understand is like, these local elections that we have every odd year. So here in 11 weeks, we have a city council election in Colorado Springs where we're going to be, hopefully re-electing Yolanda and 5 of her colleagues and electing 5 other colleagues to serve with her on city council. And one of the things I've been working with CC students now for almost 4 years. And the secret that I've told every single CC student that I've worked with, I probably told Max this when I engaged with him when he worked when he was still at CC, is if CC students, you guys are in District 5, most of you, which is our downtown, it's the north of downtown district. If just 25% of kids, students at CC turned out to vote in our local elections, you could own a city council district. You could decide pretty much every 4 years who represented District 5 on city council. And that's a big opportunity, right? There's 1 out of 9 people on that deliberative body, and CC could be directly responsible almost for electing one of those people to serve in the 38th largest city in our country. And one of the reasons that I love this city and why I've decided to stay here is, I kind of view Colorado Springs as the underdog. I think because of the history of the city and its idea of being like its conservative bastion, that when there's any type of small progress that's even done here, other cities who are fighting the same struggles across the country are copycats, right? Local governments are typically pretty anxious about being the first person to step out and try something because they don't want to fail and then risk their own election or their own jobs or whatnot. And so I think one of the cool things and opportunities we have here in Colorado Springs because of that kind of underdog story is, the local change that we facilitate here, like really reverberates across the country in a way that we don't fully understand right off the bat, but you see it over time. And so I think probably the biggest challenge I have is just helping people realize just the true opportunity that we have by investing and engaging and getting activated within our local politics and just not waiting for those federal or national elections to come around to really get activated.
Well, this is all good stuff. I don't think I'll be running for office anytime soon. I appreciate the comment of the person. Maybe one day though. We just have a young baby right now, but in a few years, something to think about. And I think it's important. I agree with what Anthony was saying, that it's amazing how just those small little nudges can make a huge difference, especially in elections and things like that. I think what's interesting for our work in the community is I spent 15 years in higher ed. That was my career. And when you're in higher ed, there is a way of talking. There's a way of talking to each other. There's an assumption, even in places, and this is the CC students who are on the line, even in places where it feels like maybe there's still great inequity, or you're facing microaggressions or challenges in the CC bubble or CC community. That language, the commonality that you have though, is not present in the postgraduate world sometimes. And so, I've confronted a lot of folks who don't really understand the rationale for some of our work. Why can't the students just make better choices and figure out how to get to college on their own? Or is is education equity even possible? You know, just to challenge some of the assumptions that we might use in our common vernacular and higher ed and more higher ed space. And so I think that that's been really interesting is to recast and try to, okay, how do I not discount that person who doesn't understand what I'm trying to do, but how do I meet them where they're at and try to bring them along, you know, so they understand, especially in this community that's a little bit more conservative. How do I figure out what their priorities are and bring them along to allow them to understand what we're doing and speak in a place where they're at right now. You know, hopefully they'll understand that equity conversation later on, but speak in a place where we can connect and have a dialogue right now, I think has been a skill that I've worked on over the last couple of years. You know, I also want to say to Matrice's point, which I think was really profound, and that is, you know, when you're trying to do the work and you don't have somebody who's been in that experience before, that's really challenging. And one of the things that you'll find in the nonprofit world, especially from the funding world, so we spend a lot of time talking to foundations and grant makers, and as a nonprofit CEO, because you're always trying to raise money, is it's predominantly white and it's predominantly privileged in that space. And so you're trying to tell people about a challenge and a circumstance who have never faced that before. So it's a very intellectual experience for them sometimes, and you're trying to always personify it and personalize it and try to bring out some of the experience of our students, my personal experience, into that space, so they may have a better understanding of why this is an urgent need and the importance of our work.
Thank you so much. Want to share a quick bit of love from the chat again. We have one of our attendees saying, thank you for all your efforts. My spirit is uplifted knowing this panel is working in our system. I want to wrap up our facilitated discussion with hearing more about what motivates you all before heading into our Q&A portion. So we'd like to hear from each of you about what inspires you, motivates you to keep going and keep doing the work that you're doing. Creating change, even at a local level, can be a difficult task. So what keeps you going in this work?
I can go. I think for me, you know, things right now definitely seem pretty bleak. Reading the news can be pretty difficult. But the thing that sort of keeps me hopeful is just seeing all the great work that so many people in our city, in our state, in our country, all across the world are doing. And so I think what motivates me is just a desire to emulate that and try and be as much like these people who are doing all this great work as I possibly can. And then hopefully things will get better.
I think for me, what motivates me is that, like, I would like to hope that a lot of the things that people are working for now are things that people in the future would be hoping for too and trying to fix. But also, like, I don't want people to have to wait, 5, 10, 20 years for people to start having those conversations. If someone's here that can do it now, why not start now? And so that's what kind of keeps me going is that I can at least start to have those conversations, so that, like, people in the future, they could, like, learn from the things that I did if it was like a mistake or anything like that. And it's not even necessarily that I personally have to do it. It's just like starting that process for the future, really. And also, me being a first generation student, I definitely, like, think of myself as, like, someone that, like, wants to help my siblings that are coming after me going into college and things like that. And so I want to be able to, pass on something to them to help them. And that's traditionally just what the role that I have played. I've always been, the big sister, no matter what age I am or where I fall in within my siblings. So I definitely want to just have something for them to look forward and for my family in general.
For me, it really has been to have an impact. So I graduated from CC in 1985. I was a single mom, El Palmar scholar, but there were times that I didn't have enough money to put gas in my car to go to CC. I lived off of Union and Bijou at the time. And so, but I knew that in my heart that it was temporary. I never considered myself poor, even though, I had potatoes and beans pretty much every day. And my kids were saying, I'm so tired of being poor. And I was like, we're not poor. We just don't have money right now, but we'll be okay. And I just knew it. And so, you know, and I use the block plan. Oh my God, do I use the block plan? I get in block mode when I've got these issues to work on, and it does really work. So I'm really grateful for all the education I received at CC. But one of the things is that having accomplished and graduating from there and then getting the job of my dreams, so which at that time was, I was a defense investigator for the public defender's office, representing the indigent, people that did not have representation. I think my life's work has been representing those who are vulnerable and have been less served. And it's just, I could see the results that I was able to impact and keep people from going to jail or getting those charges lessened. And then coming here, when in District 4, we have never, ever, ever had an urban renewal authority project, which is money. It's up to $15 million of incentives, tax breaks, you know, to have investors come here and develop. We've never, ever had that, ever. And now by the end of this first quarter, we're slated to have 2. So I'm very just excited about that and hopeful, but I'm called a chihuahua that's always nipping at someone's ankles because I won't shut up. We have a park, 13-acre panorama park that, you know, our parks here, we don't even have trees or bathrooms. And now we're slated to have this park that's going to have all these amenities and this bathroom with mosaic around it and a destination point for our kids to be at. So we've got this economic development going, and we have all kinds of housing slated for the Southeast. We've got the low income housing, affordable housing, workforce housing, and market value housing. Do we need more? Yes. However, because there's so many NIMBYs and the rest of the city is like not in my backyard, right? And that's what's going on. And I'm going to come back to the zoning, which the city right now is looking for flex zoning so we can have smaller houses, just different products within a community that's more accessible. But there is so much pushback on that right now. But so I am so grateful that, and I'm really happy and excited about what I have been able to accomplish, not just me, but with my community. And it's been a community that was told that one of the people that are helping me now, she said, I never even heard about the Southeast until 2 years ago. And people are starting to hear it in a different light. It's not all negative. So they're hearing it in a different light. And it's just so great to connect with my community. And I feel like we're just doing it all together. So I have a lot of faith. And, you know, here I am at the intersection of being a woman, Mexican American, and blind. And you look at that, it seems like that would be impossible to be a city council person, right? But it's not, because here I am. And so I just want to give that to all, because no one out there knows what we're going to face. And just know that you are going to face some tough times. Maybe you're not going to go blind or, you know, be in a wheelchair and stuff, but you're going to face some tough times, but you can still do so much because the depth and breadth of who we are is huge. You know, you think about an iceberg, our 5 senses are just the outside part of us. It's just like the tip of the iceberg. So that's what the comment I want to give is like, to be excited that you can be, you know, be part of the change, and no matter what position or what your life looks like right now.
Yeah, you know, I think for me, you know, I think one of the greatest things I learned that's really helped me out with this work, that it's kind of led to the things that motivate and drive me is, first of all, recognizing that like we're all not going to, you know, fix the world all by ourselves, and we're not going to fix the world overnight. And so one of the things that has really, you know, I think helped me stay motivated is just really learning how to celebrate the small wins and the small things that, you know, over time accumulate into being large victories. You know, some of the things I think about is, you know, what Stacey Abrams just did in Georgia, of leading that charge to, you know, change the state of Georgia to a different color on the political spectrum. And November. That wasn't a 6-month project. That was a 10 to 20-year project, right? That she worked on. And those small wins build up into big wins. So I really am motivated by even just the small things that don't feel like a big thing, and taking the time to celebrate those. The other thing that really motivates me, I think, with the state of the work that I'm in now and where I see my space in this work going is, being able to mentor and elevate other people to find their own voice and to participate, and to really, watch other people find their own passions in this work and be able to take the tools that in some small way I help them gain and go off and do the work in their own capacity to change the world in the ways that make the most sense to them. And so for me, I think really I've gotten to a point where the things that motivate me most are, just, finding the time to, whenever something, even if it's a small thing happens, if it's a small piece of legislation that's passed or just one small election victory, taking the time to celebrate that, because that's a big thing. And then I think the second thing is, just recognizing that, no one person can do all this work. And so the more folks we can have on our team, the more folks we can empower to find their own voice, and the small roles we play in helping people do that is just so cool to me. And I almost get more excited about watching other people do really cool stuff anymore than I do in taking, excitement into things that I've helped do.
I was going to say, I think a lot about the starfish metaphor or analogy. Many of you have heard that story before. There's some guy walking on a beach, maybe it's a girl, I don't know, but they're walking on the beach and somebody, is throwing the starfish back into the ocean, and somebody says, well, you're not really making a difference, because there's so many starfish washed up on the beach. And they say, well, I made a difference to that one. And I've actually always hated that metaphor, because of the way my brain works is I'm like, well, if there are so many starfish washing up the beach, we need to create a system to stop the starfish from getting on the beach. And that's how we could save all the starfish. Right. And, but to be honest, the individual has meant so much to me over the last 16 months as I came on and I started working at Peak Ed. Some of the stories that we have with just the work we've done with individual students and helping them sort of find their path, find their passion, get excited about where they're headed, and how to do it. And and as an educator, I always love when I I say a bunch of stuff, or I have a great session that we do, and you're not really sure that the kids are really getting it, or the audience isn't really understanding. And then 8 months later, they come back and said, well, you said that one, that thing that was really important, and that impacted me, and so I love that when that happens. And, I feel like that's a point of difference where you make, but you don't always know that it's happening in the moment. It's something that maybe comes back up a little bit later on. So I still think we should find a way to stop, metaphorically, the starfish from washing up on the beach. But I do think that it's really important to the individual wins, and kind of like what Anthony was saying, the small progressive wins that when you look back, you're like, oh my gosh, we've come so far. But it's just taking those small incremental changes over time to get there. And so that's what motivates me and keeps me excited. And one other thing I would say is there's been so many curveballs with COVID-19 in the last 16 months, or last year, feels like 16 months, but last almost year now, that I would say that you've also learned to be incredibly flexible, to hold on to that goal or that thing you were aiming for originally, and saying, no, you know what, this is pretty good. We did pretty well considering the circumstances, and we've still accomplished a lot, and we're moving forward, and we're laying the groundwork for the future. So that's sort of how I think about it, and what motivates me, and look forward to the questions coming up here.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, we definitely talk about creating change as more of a marathon than a sprint, and you all are doing amazing work here in our local community, creating pathways for future generations, and want to thank you all for joining us and sharing more about you. Definitely want to hop over to our Q&A now, because we do have some good questions coming through, but just want to thank you all for that final kind of wrap up thought of motivation. I feel more motivated, and I'm hoping other folks on this call as well are feeling some renewed energy and motivation on this MLK Day. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Sophia Prey, to guide us through some of your questions, and would like to once again invite folks to continue to pop some questions into the chat there.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki, and thank you to our panelists. I know that there's no substitute for real applause, but I hope you're all feeling affirmation in the virtual world heading your way. So I too feel very motivated after listening to you all, so thank you. We'll get started. There's 2 questions that are around the topic of affordable housing, so I'll try to group them together based on topic. So the first is about just terminology. So what is red zoning and block busting? And then a follow-up question, do you think that changing the zoning in downtown neighborhoods is a solution to affordability? Yes, it will create more housing options, density, but given the current rents in downtown and demand/desire to live downtown, how does this address affordability? Does it push people out unintentionally?
Awesome. Well, so first, I apologize for just dropping, not explaining them. But so redlining was a policy under which, so in the 1930s, the federal government started insuring home loans, which made it much easier.
You froze on us, Max. Can you still hear us?
Oops. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go. You're back.
Okay, cool. So the Federal Housing Administration, which administered those loans, refused to give loans in communities of color, neighborhoods that are predominantly Black. And so it segregated cities and prevented a generation of Black Americans from accessing line of credit. And it's one of the driving factors behind the racial wealth gap today. And block busting is a sort of similar. I sort of mentioned those two as being part of this policy family that were designed to segregate neighborhoods, and sort of were a big part of the federal government's urban policies from the 1920s through like the 1960s. Block busting is just when a developer or like a real estate agent tried to scare white families by moving a Black family in and then trying to scare them into selling their homes for very little money based on racial fears. So again, apologies for just dropping those and moving along. So to the second question, just sort of to be clear, when we talk about allowing more housing in single family zones, we're not talking about downtown. So downtown is covered by a different type of zoning called form-based zoning, and that allows, it has much more flexibility in terms of the types of housing that are allowed. And so right now I actually live sort of in the neighborhood just south of Colorado College, north of downtown, in a 3-bedroom apartment that is one of 7 units in a big house. And I pay $500 a month. And that is a rare find in Colorado Springs. And it's a rare find in Colorado Springs to a large degree because in most of the city, the parts of the city that aren't downtown, that this kind of housing that I live in is not allowed. And I do think the concern about if we upzone areas, are we going to push people out? That's a very valid concern. That's something like in New York City, when certain neighborhoods have been upzoned, it's been essentially opening the door to gentrification. But what we're talking about specifically is changing single family zoning. So if you look at like right now, 2 neighborhoods in Colorado Springs that are particularly vulnerable to gentrification, Mill Street, which is the neighborhood just south of downtown, and Hillside, which is sort of just southeast of downtown. Those are predominantly like 2-family and like, a little bit of multifamily zoning. And so right now what's happening is because so much of the city is off limits to new development, it's already built out because it's zoned for single family. All the new development is getting forced into those neighborhoods. And like Yolanda said, being forced into the Southeast, and it's causing prices to rise really rapidly. And so when we talk about gentrification, it's important that we allow new housing evenly throughout the city. And the only way to do that is to open up existing single family zones to new kinds of housing. But thank you for that question. I think it's an important point to clarify. And I guess I just will also say, like, is changing zoning the solution to the affordable housing crisis? No, we need to do a lot more. It's one piece of the puzzle, but I think it's an important piece.
Thank you, Max, for sharing that. And really quickly, do you mind sharing out some resources if people are now very interested in looking into local affordable housing policy kind of movements that are happening, is there anywhere they should look for information?
So the city keeps a website that if you just Google Retool COS, you can find information about the process and what's ongoing. I can also put our website is just Colorado Springs Browsing Partnership.com, and we have some information there and some resources there, so people can check it out and feel free to contact us via that site as well.
Awesome, thank you. All right, moving into our next question for Council Member Avila. Are you hopeful that the Police Oversight Committee might be able to provide real oversight? Is there anything regular citizens can do to support your work with that committee?
Okay, that's a great question. And I just want to do the red zoning for just 1 minute here. So we talk about these things, but it's really good to get a picture of it. So we had a Conejos neighborhood and it was red zoned. And right now at the Pioneers Museum, they have a display of the Conejos neighborhood. Many of those people that lived in that neighborhood live in my district now. And it was a community of mostly Black and brown people. It was a beautiful, loving community that took care of each other. And so, but eventually that neighborhood got bulldozed down and it's now what is called America the Beautiful. There's a mural about Conejo Street that's under the bridge at Colorado Avenue. And I'd encourage everybody to go there. So I want to encourage the students to really be part of the city. You guys have a free bus pass throughout, oh, well, you paid for it in your tuition, throughout the city. Use it. Go, I invite you down here to Southeast. I mean, really get to know the city, become a part of it. And so use the transit system and go find out about Conejos. Go to the Pioneers Museum that tells us the city. So about the law enforcement accountability, it's not oversight. And that's the troubling part, that, you know, the mayor made sure and his chief of staff, it's not oversight, because they didn't want it to be oversight, because that would mean that we'd get to go into their records and really see what's going on. In Denver, they have a dashboard that explains everything that they're doing and why, but we don't have that here. And so this, I'm going to be honest with you, when I talked about this and it was forming, I called it window dressing. So it's like, what do you do when you have lemons? Make lemonade. So I do believe it's window dressing. I don't think it's designed. I think it's designed to keep the status quo going, but I made myself a liaison to make sure that I'm getting all the materials possible to get to the Law Enforcement Accountability Commission. There's 11 commissioners and 2 alternates. And so tomorrow night at 6, they're having their meeting, and they're gonna start with 3-minute comment. So you can feel free to comment your experiences or whatever you think for 3 minutes into this commission, and I'll get you that information. I'll get you that information to call in. Also on Thursday, there's going to be a town hall, and at that town hall, see, on the Tuesday, it's going to be comments for 3 minutes, and then they're going into the meeting. And all these meetings are public. You can tune in anytime on these meetings. But on Thursday, it's going to be just a town hall where people are calling in. It's going to be for 2 hours. Sometimes those type of town halls last 15 minutes, an hour. Sometimes they go over. So we don't know what but so I'm going to send the links. Sign up if you want to talk, and get ready to have your voice heard.
And there's another town hall on February 13th.
And there'll be another town hall on February 13th. I hope that answers some of your questions. I know it's not a lot, right? So, but we're working on it. And anytime I get articles or people tell me their experience, I email LETAC, all the commissioners, to let them know what's going on. And a lot of times they haven't heard that that's going on. So like I said, the police chief, I think it's a stonewall talking to them at this point.
Thank you for that. And just a quick shout out from the audience. Someone said, yes, know your history. Yes, Yolanda. Conejos neighborhood was demolished because of zoning. So an appreciation from there. And then another shout out to CC professor, Dr. Florencia Rojo, who led a group of students to challenge CSPD on their lack of data transparency in comparison to all of police departments across Colorado and the country. So I think this is kind of a bigger question, and this can maybe be our final question. Feel free to jump in. This isn't to any specific panelist, but I'll just read it aloud. Sometimes we don't organize as a larger city and often work against ourselves and our shared issue/cause. For example, after Devon was murdered at the hands of police, the community organized and advocated for a police oversight committee with authority. When Mr. Floyd was murdered, another group of organizers worked and advocated for the commission with no real power/authority. How do we build our movements in partnership, not working against each other to make change?
Just so there's a community within the whole Colorado Springs community. So I want people to know that we got a lot of emails like from the other parts of town, like the Northeast and Northwest, and it was like support our police. And they said some ugly things, right? Like keep those criminals, and they didn't really understand because they don't have the experience, right? They don't have the experience of being Black or brown or poor. And there was a question that went around on Facebook that asked young Black and brown men if they had a gun pointed to their head. I have 4 brothers. 3 of my brothers, the older, have had the guns pointed to their head. And so how could they even understand that? So we're a small community that, yes, that worked against each other, but that without this new community that came in, they had only been in it's called the People's Group. They came in and they met each other at these protests, been here for 3 weeks or so. And there had been this community that's been here doing the work for years. And they're called the Austin Group, who went to Austin to a NARO conference and to figure out what was the best way to, do community policing and how we can come together with police and community. And that's why I think they really pushed oversight. But the peoples, which are made up of very young people, they were like willing to work with what the council and the mayor wanted. And so ultimately they became endorsed by most of council and the mayor. And so they had more clout. And as a result, there's 2 of those young persons from the People Group on this commission. And there's 1 person on the group from the Austin Group. So, on the commission from the Austin Group. And so I think that we need all of you. And if you know people that are impacted in such a way, in a negative way, right? That will call in and will speak and will show up and tell their stories, that we don't let it go. We don't let it be the 15 minutes. But Martin Luther King, one of the things he did was when he did protests, it was so well organized. Before he protested, he made sure that he got every permit. He didn't just go half-hocked on anything. He made sure everything, because if he needed to, he would go to court and they would always win because they did everything right. So it's like, let's get the permits, let's get what we need, but let's still continue to organize, to protest, and to keep pushing for a very responsible, transparent, and accountable law enforcement.
If I could step in for a minute on that, on that one. When I think about community organizing, especially around these issues that are incredibly sensitive and really, I think, stir at people's emotions, I think of a lot of this along the ways of how tug of war matches are played. And if you've ever played in a competitive game of tug of war, your strongest people who can do the best pulling are at the back, right? And then you have folks closer to the front who are just as important, but they play a different role of, of trying not to get in the mud and really kind of not letting the ball advance, the middle of the rope advance farther than it is necessary. And both of those positions are just as important in a game of tug of war. If you don't have your anchors at the back, the guys up front are going to get pulled in the mud right away because you don't have those folks who have the strength and the ability to really kind of hold the line. But if you don't have those folks up front who can see, who are willing to get a little bit muddy, who are willing to try to make sure the ball doesn't advance or the middle of the rope doesn't advance any farther than is necessary, you're not going to win either. And I think a lot about that when I think about community organizing, especially in these spaces. We always need our advocates who are those strong people who put their foot down and and are the to me in politics, it's the progressive wing of the Democratic Party versus the moderate wing, right? To me, both of those pieces of the Democratic Party are important. To me, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is where ideally we would be, but without those folks in swing states who have to tailor their message a little bit or say things a little bit differently, guess what? Those seats are going to go to the other side of the aisle and you're not going to get anything done, right? But what I think the important thing is I think oftentimes we misdiagnose what it is we're trying to do, right? When we think about, for example, and, I recognize my privilege as a white man and my perspective on this really doesn't, I think, hold a lot of weight or water. But, when I think about, the LETAC and what happened over the summer with the protests and this committee that came out of it, it just kind of holds the hand of the police department, is, to me, it was disappointing to watch that and see two entities that were really hoping for the same outcomes, I think, kind of tear at each other throughout that process. And I think, the thing that I came out of that wondering is, how do we really kind of, before we go into these challenges, identify what the actual outcome is that we want, right? Because I think, when we talk about, those protests over the summer and why they started and why there's the need for oversight, for me, it's because everybody, regardless of who you are, what you look like, deserves to be treated with dignity, respect, and your rights deserve to be honored, right? And if we can say this is our outcome, I think instead of making your outcomes based off of what you're wanting to move towards and the justice that you're wanting to seek in society, that gives you the ability to disagree on the road to get there, whether it's how much teeth does a policy have, or recognizing that sometimes you got to kick the door open a little bit before you can blast it down to get where you want to go. I think, being able to come together and have those fundamental conversations about, let's take the policy and put it aside first and figure out what's the actual impact we want to have on society. What's a society look like when we get to the other side of this? I think it makes it so much easier for groups who both want to have the same impact and they want to see the same things happen, be able to work through those moments of disagreement or those moments where it feels like the road is splitting a little bit and you got to choose what to do. There's always going to be emotion in it. There's always going to be frustration in it. But I think if you can set that guiding principle of what you're wanting to get out of it, it makes those disagreements and those challenges of building really broad coalitions a lot easier. And so, that's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about, is what role do all of us on this conversation play in that, of, kind of identifying what we want and recognizing that the roads are not always going to be easy to get there. But if we, stand by each other on the desired outcome we want, it makes it a lot easier for us to get through it. And, instead of tearing down relationships, building them up and being stronger at the end as a result.
I would like to say something really quick. Yeah, I think that's a really good point that that individual brought up. And personally, I am quite disappointed in how that situation played out, because I personally don't think it will lead to really anything if there's not any type of actual accountability there. But I think, like, for this to actually change, people need to be okay with being uncomfortable. Like, that's just like the reality of the situation. Like, we have to be okay with, like, walking into a room with, like, someone that we completely disagree with and having a conversation with them, rather than, like, let me just yell at you and try to, like, push my agenda on you. We need to, like, actually have a conversation so that we understand, like, what is happening, what is going on, and how can we get to a solution. And also, like, I want to say that, like, sometimes, like, some people are not able to do that, and it, like, everyone doesn't necessarily have to work together, because if there's, like, fundamentally like a morality difference. Like you may not always come to the same conclusion, but I do think that people should like start to have those conversations where we're talking about those differences. And like if someone says something that like questions your morals, then like understand why. Like what is the history behind that? Like why do you feel uncomfortable? Like we have to be in that feeling rather than just going to the environment that makes us feel the most comfortable and secure in our thoughts and feelings and things like that. And I feel like once we start to do that, then we can break down barriers. We can start to understand systemic oppression. We can start to understand these types of things without attaching it to like morally how we think things should go, because it doesn't always match up with reality and how things should really be.
All right. Well, I think that's a great ending place for this panel. I just want to say one more time, big imaginary round of applause for you all. Thank you for taking the time to share your insights, your wisdom, your experiences with the audience. And I just want to make a quick plug for the next 2 days. On Tuesday and Wednesday, there actually will be panels that kind of address some of the things that have come up. So there'll be a session on understanding yourself and how you fit into Colorado Springs. So that's a session happening tomorrow at 3. And then on Wednesday, there's one on democratic communication. So kind of what Martrice was talking about, understanding how you can talk to people in a nonviolent way and understand their intentions. So that'll be happening on Wednesday. But again, major thank you to our panelists today. We are really grateful for you taking the time out of your days to be here and engage in these conversations. And there's a bunch of things pouring into the Q&A. So thank you all for your time. And Nikki, I'll hand it back to you. If there's anything left.
That's it. Just my deepest gratitude as well to all of our panelists for joining us in this discussion today and looping in, tying it to a lot of the activities that were happening this morning with CC and community organizations around MLK Day. Thank you all so much for sharing your time, sharing a piece of you and the work that you are doing. Very much appreciate all of you, and to everyone who joined us, thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon and evening.